For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass House Resolution 162.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 162, resolution calling on the President to provide Ukraine with military assistance to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Ross Littenden, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous material on this resolution.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, sir. As always, Mr. Royce, the chairman of our Committee on Foreign Affairs, appreciates the ranking member, Eliot Engel of New York's leadership in support of the people of Ukraine. Last week, March 18th, Mr. Speaker, marked the 1-year anniversary of Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion and occupation of Crimea. During the past year, Russia has strengthened its hold over the peninsula, expanded its military presence, and increased its oppression of the minority Tatar population and others who refuse to bend to its occupation. Putin's success in Crimea emboldened him to expand his aggression into eastern Ukraine. Last April, Chairman Ed Royce of California, chairman of our committee, led a delegation to Ukraine and traveled to Russia speaking east. The many Ukrainians that Ranking Member Engel and Mr. Royce met with wanted to be Ukrainians, not separatists. Yet Moscow moved to forcibly seizing Crimea to aggressively supporting militant separatists in eastern Ukraine. Today, Mr. Speaker, the conflict in the east has resulted in over 6,000 deaths, at least 15,000 wounded, and more than 1 million displaced persons. This carnage is the work of the separatist forces controlled by Moscow, which has supplied them with massive amounts of weapons and has even sent in Russian military forces in combat supporting roles. As Assistant Secretary Victoria Nuland testified before the Foreign Affairs Committee this month, Russia, quote, has thousands and thousands, end quote, of soldiers operating in Ukraine. And as she summed up, quote, this is a manufactured conflict controlled by the Kremlin, fueled by Russian tanks and heavy weapons, financed at Russian taxpayers' expense, end quote. Mr. Speaker, the administration's response to this crisis has been tepid at best. 6 months ago, the president of Ukraine stood in this very chamber and, while thanking the United States for our assistance so far, asked for defensive weapons to enable Ukraine to defend itself against superior forces. Pointedly, he told both houses of Congress, quote, one cannot win a war with blankets, end quote, which is what we are providing. Earlier this month, members met with First Deputy Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament, who said that his country urgently needs anti-tank weapons, such as the Javelin, radar to pinpoint enemy fire, and communications equipment to overcome Russian jamming. Ukrainian forces cannot match the advanced equipment that Russia is pouring into eastern Ukraine. There is no shortage of the will to fight, only a shortage of defensive weapons. Legal authority for such assistance was made crystal clear by the Congress in December by passing the Ukraine Freedom Support Act. And top administration officials, including Secretary of Defense Carter and Chairman Dempsey of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, have indicated support. Indeed, this weekend, NATO's top military commander asked, quote, is inaction an appropriate action, end quote? We know his answer is no. Unfortunately for Ukrainians and for international security, President Obama has chosen inaction in the guise of endless deliberation. But there's far more at stake here than the fate of Ukraine, Mr. Speaker. This unprovoked attack on a peaceful country, the forcible occupation of its territory, and an effort to unilaterally redraw its internationally recognized borders will undermine the foundation of the international order that was established and has been defended at great cost by the United States and our allies. The world is closely watching what we will do to help Ukraine defend itself from outright assault. If it is too little too late, those with designs on a neighboring country will feel all that more emboldened. The people of Ukraine are not asking for us to fight for them. They are only asking for the weapons they need to defend themselves. I ask our colleagues to vote for this bipartisan resolution, urging the administration to provide this critical assistance to Ukraine before it is indeed too late. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of this resolution, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Without objection.
First of all, I want to again thank our Chairman Emeritus of the Foreign Affairs Committee, my dear friend from Florida, Ileana Ross-Lehtinen, who is very eloquent. I want to stand by every word she uttered. I agree with her 100%. I want to also thank our Chairman, Ed Royce, who also has been steadfast in fighting for the freedom of the people of Ukraine. And it's been a pleasure to work with him on a bipartisan basis. This is a bipartisan issue. Policy like this should not be partisan. And that's why we're rising today as Democrats and Republicans, really as Americans, to say enough is enough in Ukraine. As I've been saying for months, we cannot view the crisis in Ukraine as just some faraway conflict or someone else's problem. This war has left thousands of dead, tens of thousands wounded, 1 million displaced, and has begun to threaten the post-Cold War stability of Europe. In fact, with Mr. Putin, he's knocking us back into the Cold War, the bad old days of the Cold War. The battle is being waged in the haze of a massive Kremlin-backed propaganda campaign aimed at eroding confidence in the West and democratic institutions, the same propaganda permeating allied countries on the Russian frontier that we are treaty-bound to defend. Under the corrupt and repressive rule of Vladimir Putin, Russia has become a clear threat to a half-century of American commitment to and investment in a Europe that is whole, free, and at peace, a Europe where borders are not changed by force. What Putin is doing is he's changing borders by force since on the continent of Europe for the first time since World War II. This cannot stand. The United States cannot turn a blind eye to it. The United States cannot put its head in the sand and act like any other country and pretend that maybe this will go away. In 1938, another dictator named Adolf Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia and said he was going into the Sudetenland to protect ethnic Germans. Mr. Putin said the same thing about Crimea. He was going into Crimea to prevent the hurt of ethnic Russians. Same nonsense. Hitler got away with it in 1938, and there were people who said, well, you know, if we just give him the Sudetenland, he'll be happy, he'll be content, he'll leave us alone, his aggression will stop. Same people are saying, to some people today are saying the same thing. Just give Putin Crimea. Just give Putin a little bit of the eastern part of Ukraine, and he'll be happy, he'll go away, he won't threaten anything else. You don't satiate a bully by giving him what he wants early on, because it only whets his appetite for worse things to come. And at the point later on, when you have to go at the bully, it'll be much, much harder to defeat him, to stop him, than it was if you had simply stood up to him when he started his aggression. This is what's happening now in Ukraine. This war poses the greatest threat to European security since World War II. And we shouldn't take it lightly, and we shouldn't be idle, and we shouldn't sit back, and we shouldn't let other countries tell us what to do. Last year, Ukrainian President Poroshenko stood in this very chamber at a joint session of Congress and related the challenges facing the people of Ukraine, their desire to reclaim their dignity and rebuild their country's future. He asked that we help the men and women fighting a war against a neighbor that they had once looked to as a friend. He told us they needed defensive weapons. They needed weapons. He said that blankets that we're sending do not win a war. Last month, I saw President Poroshenko again in Europe, and he again pled for military assistance, not to attack Moscow, not to defeat the Russian army, not even to push the Russians out of Ukrainian territory, but simply to hold the line, to slow Russia's advance, and to give his government breathing room to focus on other threats, such as keeping the Ukrainian economy afloat. Mr. Speaker, we cannot allow Europe's borderlands to once again become Europe's bloodlands. Fortunately, there is still time for the United States to act in a moderate but decisive fashion to help Ukraine defend itself, to limit Russia's ability to further destabilize our friends and allies, and our friends in Ukraine in particular, and to safeguard our interests and defend our values across this region. All the countries, some of them NATO members, some of them not, some of them part of the former Soviet Union, some of them not, some of them former East Bloc nations, some of them not, all the ones that border on Russia are all worrying because they think that if Putin can get away with what he wants to get away with in Ukraine, will they be next? The United States is not being asked to send ground troops to Ukraine. The United States is not being asked to get itself involved in another war. We are simply being asked to give the Ukrainians the methods to defend themselves, the weapons to defend themselves. I can't think of anything more reasonable. We've held hearings on Ukraine. We've passed resolutions of support. We sent legislation to the President's desk. It was the last thing we passed in the last Congress. The President signed it into law, authorizing an array of assistance, including the defensive arms Ukraine so desperately needs. And here we are again to renew this call, to remind the people of Ukraine that they're not alone, and to send an unambiguous message to the administration, to the President, and to our allies in Europe. The time has come to do more. We must meet this threat together because we all have a stake in how this ends. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank Ms. Ross-Lehtinen and Chairman Royce, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the remainder of my time to Chairman Royce and ask unanimous consent that he be allowed to control that time.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, Mr. Speaker. And as my good friend Elliot Engel from New York explained last April, we took a delegation to Ukraine, not just to the western part of the country, but most importantly, we went to the east. We went to Dnipropetrovsk. We went as far east as we could go up against the border there of Donetsk and Luhansk. And we had an opportunity to have a dialogue with the Ukrainian people. And we reached out to civil society. We set up meetings with women's groups and lawyers groups and across the spectrum in eastern Ukraine, speaking to Russian-speaking Ukrainians, we got, I believe, a good idea of what was on their mind. I think there were about 8 members of our delegation. And they were sharing with us these words. What Putin is doing, what the Russians are doing right now, is going out on the internet and recruiting every skinhead and malcontent in the Russian-speaking region that they can find, and then they train these young men, and then they send them over the border to create mayhem. And what we're trying to do here, this was the explanation from the Ukrainians, we are trying to catch them. They speak a different accent than we do, so we can catch them. And we try to hold them until this war is over. But increasingly we find that what is happening is that the Russians are sending their own troops over. They're sending their own armor. They're sending over military equipment that we cannot defend against. And what they said to us is, we're not asking you for your assistance in this fight. All we're asking is that we might have the defensive weapons to check this assault, so that we can defend ourselves in this city, we need anti-tank weapons. And you and I know, by the way, Mr. Speaker, that when those tanks come, those are not going to be Ukrainian separatists driving those tanks. Those are going to be Russian tankers in those tanks. So this is what they're asking us for. And they've asked for month after month after month in order to set up a strategy that would cause the Russians to believe there was some kind of credible deterrence. But you know, instead, we now see that Russia may try to secure a land bridge to Crimea. In other words, this conflict might escalate because of additional Russian aggression. Or they might seize strategic ports along the Black Sea, additional ports. You had 6,000 people so far that have lost their lives that I know of in the conflict from the reports I've read. You have a million Ukrainians that have been made refugees that have pulled west out of the area. And obviously, to date, the actions taken by the U.S. and our EU allies, including economic sanctions and aid and diplomatic isolation, all of the talk, none of that has checked Russian aggression, or I should say Putin's aggression here. And over the past year, he has clearly become bolder, even menacing NATO countries as he seeks to divide the alliance. Now, the Obama administration and our European allies have put hope in diplomatic and ceasefire arrangements, but frankly, that is not working. So we come back to the request. And this month, we met with the first Deputy Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament, as Elliot Engel shared here today on the floor, who said that his country urgently needs anti-tank weapons such as the Javelin and radar to pinpoint enemy artillery fire that is coming into their towns, and communications equipment to overcome Russian jamming. That's the request. Ukrainian forces cannot match advanced equipment that Russia is pouring into eastern Ukraine. And there is no shortage of the will here on the part of the Ukrainians. We saw many volunteers in their local militia there in Dnipropetrovsk taking up their position. But what they have is a shortage of defensive weapons. At this committee's hearing last month, Secretary Kerry said that the Obama administration has still not made a decision on whether to send defensive lethal military aid to Ukraine. 6 months, this is 6 months after President Poroshenko told us, as we sat here in this joint session of Congress to hear his remarks, that one cannot win the war with blankets. So, we're at a turning point. And one, I think I agree with Mr. Engel on this, it's one of historic importance. If we allow aggression against Ukraine to stand without us at least offering the Ukrainians the ability to defend themselves, we will signal to the world that our willingness to defend the post-World War II international order is crumbling. The semblance of rules the world is abided by will be severely weakened. The result could usher in an era of instability and conflict in many regions with consequences no one can predict. Or we can allow the Ukrainians to defend themselves. And that's what we do with this legislation. The Ukrainian people are asking for our help to stop Russia's efforts to sever their country. They are not asking us to do any of the fighting for them. They are only asking us for the defensive weapons that they need to defend themselves. And by passing this bipartisan resolution overwhelmingly, the House will send a strong message to the administration that it must act quickly and decisively if the U.S. is to help the Ukrainian people save their country. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's now my pleasure to yield 4 minutes to my good friend from Maryland, the Democratic Whip, Steny Hoyer.
Consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of this resolution offered by my friend, the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and supported strongly by the chairman of the committee and the former chair of the committee, Ms. Ross-Lehtinen. This resolution is bipartisan and reflects the will of Congress that the nation of Ukraine deserves every opportunity to chart a future based on democracy, territorial integrity, and freedom from Russian aggression. I'm the former chairman of the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, signed in Helsinki in August of 1975. In that agreement, the Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union, and 34 other nations signed a document which said that you could not change borders by other than peaceful means. Vladimir Putin has broken that agreement, but he's also broken the agreement that in 1994 we entered into with Ukraine in consideration of their giving up their nuclear weapons. Vladimir Putin has sent Russian troops into another nation. He's tried to mask it. He's tried to the pretense that this is simply separatists who are active. But very frankly, those troops in Ukraine have admitted to the press that they're from Russia. Vladimir Putin's support for violent separatists has destabilized a large region in eastern Ukraine and led to the illegal Russian occupation of Crimea. And the world hasn't done much to discourage not only the actions of Mr. Putin, but others who would learn the lessons of his actions. The sanctions that the United States and its allies have imposed against Putin and his closest supporters, as well as measures to isolate Russian businesses that have enabled this aggression, are having serious effect, but not yet the effect that we want. But I believe that our nation also has a responsibility to stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of Ukraine and their democratically elected government by sending them the tools they need to defend themselves. This is not a new position for me. When the Serbs effected a genocide in Bosnia-Herzegovina, we had an arms embargo on the people of Bosnia, while arms were flowing in from other parts of the world to Serbia. I thought that was wrong. I think today, the unwillingness or inability to create a consensus for giving to a people the ability to defend themselves is not good policy. If we continue to do so, there is no doubt in my mind that Mr. Putin will continue on his path of aggression and acquisition. Mr. Speaker, we must continue to support Ukraine on its march towards greater democracy, stronger human rights, and a brighter future for its people. I urge my colleagues to join in supporting this resolution and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Speaker, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Frelinghuysen.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the chairman for yielding for his sponsorship of this resolution with Mr. Engel and Ms. Roth-Leighton. Mr. Speaker, ISIL is on the march. Civil war appears imminent in Yemen. Libya has now become a full-fledged terrorist training center threatening all of North Africa. Iran moves closer to nuclear capacity every day. So it's understandable the attention of the media and the American people seem to be focused elsewhere other than on Ukraine. But I just returned a week ago from leading a bipartisan delegation of the Defense Appropriations Committee to Ukraine, and I'm here to report that the situation there is downright alarming. Today, weeks after agreeing to a ceasefire, Vladimir Putin is using Ukraine as a test bed for a new type of warfare by using proxy insurgents in Russia and special forces army troops to carry out his campaign to reclaim Ukraine as part of the old Russian Empire. After annexing Crimea a year ago, he's transforming that peninsula into a heavily armed Russian camp, a platform indeed. Mr. Speaker, blankets, night vision goggles, and meals that are ready to eat are not enough. Ukraine needs non-NATO ally military support, and it needs it now. Ukraine's courageous President Poroshenko appealed to us again to provide lethal weaponry, anti-tank weapons, small arms, and anti-aircraft systems to help defend their territory from the Russian onslaught. It's all about preserving and protecting Ukraine's independence. That is what this is all about, the largest country in Europe. He knows he cannot win a war against Russia, but he believes that the lethal support will at least raise the price of aggression for Russia. And I think our committee tends to agree. Our delegation left Kiev believing that the future of Ukraine is a matter of significant importance to national security of these United States. My colleagues, Western and Eastern Europeans, are watching intensely and with apprehension how our president responds. They are looking closely, as are our adversaries and the Russian leadership. What future steps will they take if we do not act now? I urge the House to show the leadership, our president, that, and this administration, that this resolution makes sense. They need to give Ukraine this non-NATO ally support, and they need to do it now. And yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields.
Thank you.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's now my pleasure to yield 2 minutes to my good friend from Georgia, Mr. David Scott.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, on the bleached bones of many past great nations are written those pathetic words, too late, too late. We moved too late to save them. History is cluttered with them. We are almost at that point with Ukraine. Anyone who has followed the Russian model under Putin knows full well what his aim is: to reclaim that territory, that empire of the old Soviet Union. Now, if Ukraine goes, what happens to Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia? And just today in the news, we hear where Russia has threatened a nuclear response. I believe it's to Denmark. Now what is happening in the world? The world now is a very dark, a very dangerous, and a very evil place. And when those three things get together, there must be that shining light on the hill that shows the way out of the darkness. And throughout history, that light has been the United States of America. We must act here. Let us hope that President Obama will hear our plea as Democrats and as Republicans. We've got to help save Ukraine from Russia. I serve on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. For 12 years, I've served on NATO. I've served as the chairman of the Science and Technology Committee.
Expired.
I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen.
Another minute.
Thank you. I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if we don't act here, there will be a devastation on the European continent, the likes that we have not seen since World War II. We don't need to repeat that. Let us rise to this occasion. Let us do the right thing. Let us be that shining light on the hill that shows the way out of this darkness. There are some times in life you've just got to stand up to the bully. The United States must stand up to Putin and let him know that there's a light in this world, and the United States is going to show the way. And the best way to do that today is to pass this resolution, and let's send Ukraine the military help that they need to protect themselves and the legacy of this fine country. Thank you.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I'll reserve the right to close.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll close now. And let me say that by passing this resolution, the House sends a clear message of support and solidarity to the people of Ukraine. It's past time that our government does more to help these true friends of liberty defend their land and deter further aggression. And I know that if the United States shows leadership here, others will follow. I'm very pleased to be the primary sponsor of this important resolution. I thank Chairman Royce for working with me on this. The two of us have worked very, very closely together, particularly on Ukraine, and we both feel very, very strong. I agree with every comment that was uttered today by all the people speaking on this resolution. We are the United States of America. We're a beacon of freedom to the world, and if we don't act now, who will? Again, let me reiterate, the people of Ukraine are not looking for American troops. They're not looking for American boots on the ground. There is no slippery slope here. They are just looking for the weapons to defend themselves. They don't have those weapons. We do. If we care about freedom and we care about fighting aggression, we need to give the people of Ukraine the right and the means to defend themselves. I urge my colleagues to support this very important resolution. I again thank Chairman Royce, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume, and I would just go to the words that Mr. David Scott reminded us that echo down through history. Too late, too late. We have given the authority to the administration many months ago to transfer defensive weapons to Ukraine that can be used to check further aggression. That has not happened. This bipartisan resolution will direct the administration to take that step so that Ukrainians can defend themselves. And I ask my colleagues to vote for this bipartisan resolution, urging the administration to provide this crucial assistance to Ukraine before it is, in fact, too late for the Ukrainians to defend themselves. I yield back.
Yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 162? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The resolution is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman of Kentucky rise?
I request a recorded vote of the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise or remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed.
The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Ross Leitner, to suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 162 as amended, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 162, resolution calling on the President to provide Ukraine with military assistance to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to the resolution as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And as you just heard, another vote beginning here, a 5-minute vote on House Resolution 162, military assistance for Ukraine. This is a resolution from Eliot Engel, the top Democrat on the Foreign Affairs Committee, urging the president to provide military weaponry to Ukraine as it fights Russian-backed separatists. Again, a 5-minute vote. Tomorrow, the House is expected to begin debate on the House Republicans' fiscal year 2016 budget resolution. The $3.8 trillion Republican budget plan passed the House Budget Committee last Thursday on a 22-13 party line vote and includes approximately $5.5 trillion in spending cuts. It repeals the federal health care law and would increase defense spending. On Wednesday, the Senate will join the House to hear an address by Afghanistan President Ashraf Ghani to a joint meeting of Congress. Ghani will be the second Afghan president to address Congress. President Hamid Karzai appeared before a joint meeting on June 15th in 2004. Later in the week, the House may also consider legislation to permanently replace Medicare's physician payment formula before cuts are scheduled to take place on April 1st. You're watching live House coverage here on C-SPAN.
and the nays are 48. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Gavel.